The room was swallowed by a stunned silence, as if every sound had been drained away after Daniel's words. Reverend Thompson, who had officiated hundreds of weddings in his career, stood frozen, clearly never having witnessed anything like this. Lauren, standing at the altar, began to lose her composure. Her face turned pale, her eyes wide with panic, the stunning wedding gown now nothing more than a mask about to shatter. "That's not true, Daniel," she stammered, trying to keep her voice steady, but it had taken on a high, strained pitch. "You've misunderstood." "I understand perfectly, Lauren," Daniel replied, his voice calm but razor-sharp, echoing through the church's sound system. From the front row, I watched Lauren's flawless facade begin to crack. "I have photos. I have messages. All of it," I said. Her eyes swept toward me, filled with venom. "This is Emily's fabrication," she shouted, her voice pitching higher, almost breaking. "She's always been jealous because I was about to be part of the family. She made this up." Whispers rippled through the pews like waves against the shore. I didn't stand. I simply opened my phone and handed it to an usher, who passed it to the officiant and Daniel. He held up one of the photos for Lauren to see. "So, Emily fabricated the picture of you kissing Ryan on the beach? She forged the messages about your real future with my brother?" Lauren's final attempt at denial turned desperate. "All right, fine. Yes, we had feelings before, but I chose you, Daniel. I'm here, aren't I?" Daniel shook his head, his voice dropping low but still carrying across the church. "Those messages are from yesterday, Lauren. You planned to be with Ryan tonight." In that moment, Lauren's mask shattered. The beautiful, composed bride vanished, replaced by a woman in full-blown panic and despair. A bridesmaid tried to pull her back, the sharp clack of heels echoing on the church floor. The Reverend coughed softly, asking for quiet, but the silence only made the truth ring louder. Daniel passed the phone to his parents, then to the witness. Lauren glanced around, as if searching for an escape from so many watching eyes, then suddenly tore the veil from her hair, the lace ripping with a small, sharp sound like a knife slicing paper. Her bouquet slipped from her grasp, white petals breaking from the stem and rolling down the steps. She turned and bolted down the aisle, the train of her gown dragging behind her like the remnants of broken promises. The church erupted into chaos as she shoved the doors open and ran out, leaving behind a stunned groom, 300 witnesses, and 2 marriages in ruins. Guests left in small clusters, murmuring about what they had just seen. Some approached Daniel, awkwardly offering comfort. Others slipped away in silence, unsure of what to say. 30 minutes later, Ryan walked into the sanctuary, his face ashen, eyes darting nervously. When he saw me standing there with Daniel, Reverend Thompson, and our parents, he instantly knew the carefully constructed world he'd built had collapsed. "You've destroyed everything, Daniel," he said, his voice hollow, as if he were the victim. "No," Daniel replied with unexpected certainty. "You destroyed it when you decided to have an affair with Lauren, the woman who was about to marry your brother." Ryan scrambled for excuses, his words pitiful, claiming Daniel misunderstood, that the photos were old, that he and Lauren had ended things months ago. But guilt was etched into every line of his face, and each lie only made him look more desperate. "Those messages are from yesterday, Ryan," Daniel said, holding up the phone so he could see his own words. "You planned to pick her up from her apartment after the reception. Emily saved everything from your laptop in that hidden chest of yours." From the moment Ryan entered, he hadn't once looked at me. No explanation, no apology for the pain he'd caused, no acknowledgement of the cruelty of this betrayal. Instead, he spoke only of his own hurt, as if he were the one who'd been wronged. Finally, he turned toward me. I'm sorry. I'll end it. After today. I spoke softly, just loud enough for him to hear. Today is for telling the truth, not scheduling the end of your lies. He lowered his head, with nothing left to cling to, and walked away, his steps quick across the aisle until he'd disappeared through the church doors. After that day, the space in my life and Daniel's felt washed clean by a new light. Ryan was gone, his belongings stuffed into a few hurried suitcases thrown into the back of his car, leaving behind the house we had once called our home. Lauren, I heard, had moved to a small town in Oregon, where no one knew about the torn wedding dress or the lies she'd left behind. I no longer felt anger toward them. The pain was still there, but it wasn't a fire anymore. It was like a fading scar, a reminder of what I had survived. Daniel began stopping by more often, not to talk about the past, but to cook dinner with me, plant a few pots on the balcony, and learn how to exist in a space with no room for secrets. We would sit together, not needing to fill the silence, both of us understanding that silence could be its own language when built on trust. That afternoon, the last light of day stretched through the thin curtains, spilling across the wooden table where 2 cups of tea still steamed. Daniel smiled, his eyes no longer burdened with questions, and I realized that some wounds are simply doors opening onto another path, one you can walk without having to look back. Sometimes, freedom isn't about leaving someone, I thought. It's about choosing to stay with the person who truly wants to hold your hand to the end of the road.
The family meeting to discuss Isabella's wedding took place on a Saturday afternoon in my parents' spacious living room, but the first impression came the moment we pulled into the driveway. Adrian drove the old silver Toyota, its paint faded in patches, slowly into the only available space, between Nathan's gleaming Lexus and my mother's latest model Audi. As soon as Adrian cut the engine, my mother called out from the window, lowering her voice but not enough for anyone to miss. "Park carefully, Adrian. Wouldn't want to scratch the paint? Not sure you could afford to fix it?" I caught the smirk at Nathan's lips, his glance at the Toyota a living confirmation of what he thought about Adrian's class. We walked into the house, where Nathan was already seated at the head of the table like a man orchestrating power, a thick packet of documents before him and the latest iPhone placed neatly at his side. Mother sat to his right, her face glowing as if she were the vice president of the meeting, while father was silent at the far end, arms loosely crossed. From the outset, Nathan assigned the roles. Isabella and Julian would handle the menu and guest list. Mother would choose flowers and music, and as for Adrian and me, he said with a smile tinged with disdain, we could take care of the light stuff, like decorations, picking up a few guests from the airport, and maybe helping clean up afterward. I felt the heat rush to my face, but Adrian only smiled and nodded. "Sounds fine," he said, so calm I couldn't tell if he truly agreed or was playing a long game. I clenched my hands in my lap, forcing myself to stay composed, while Nathan kept flipping through his papers, utterly unaware, or unconcerned, that this meeting had sown the seed for a drama he would never forget. The air in the living room grew heavier as Nathan began drilling into the budget, his voice even, but each word sliding like the edge of a cold blade. "Of course, everyone will contribute within their means," he said, his eyes skimming past me before settling on Adrian, as if gauging how much he could offer. "But with a tight budget, I suppose Victoria and Adrian can only handle a small share." Adrian's posture never changed, his fingers lightly turning his wedding band, his eyes steady. My mother quickly chimed in, as if to bolster Nathan's performance. "I just heard, my friend's son-in-law gave his wife a brand new car for their wedding. Must have been over $100,000. I'm so happy for them." The words came with a sweet smile, but the implication was sharp, pressing on my chest. Isabella glanced at me then, a flicker of sympathy in her eyes, lips parting as if to speak, but she lowered her gaze, pretending to focus on the tea in front of her. Nathan maintained his superior tone, continuing to break down the costs, occasionally dropping large numbers as if to emphasize the gulf between them and us. I could feel that their words weren't just about money. They were a measure of human worth, and they wanted me to believe we ranked at the very bottom. I looked toward my father, hoping for a word of dissent, or at least a supportive glance, but he sat in silence, eyes fixed on the edge of the table, fingers tapping a slow rhythm as though counting the seconds until the meeting ended. His silence was not only tacit agreement, it was like a seal of approval stamped onto Nathan and my mother's mockery, making it legitimate. Adrian remained still, turning his coffee cup in his hands, his expression so calm that if I hadn't lived with him for over 4 years, I would have thought he truly didn't care. Nathan went on, his voice echoing around the room, each sentence carrying a barb aimed squarely at us. I felt myself being pushed into an invisible corner, boxed into the role of the least successful daughter and the wife of the poor brother-in-law, no matter what we had built outside this house. The distance between me and the rest of my family had never been clearer, and I knew Adrian felt it too. But instead of reacting, he was watching, silent as a chess player waiting for the perfect moment to make a move no one would see coming. As Nathan droned on about the logic of assigning tasks based on financial capacity, I drifted into old memories, times when we had been relegated to the supporting tier at family events. I remembered last year's birthday for my mother, when Nathan booked a lavish dinner at an upscale restaurant, and our job was to arrive early to hang balloons and arrange napkins, only for guests to be told Nathan had organized the whole thing, while we were mentioned briefly as helping a little. On my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, Nathan gifted them a weekend getaway at a luxury resort, while we contributed a cake and received a cursory "thank you" as my mother gushed over Nathan. One Christmas, Adrian volunteered to drive for hours to bring home a large tree to decorate for everyone, but that evening, my mother proudly told the neighbors, Nathan ordered it from a premium place. So beautiful. Adrian just smiled then, but I knew he remembered. Those moments, along with every look and every word from today, were piling up into a heavy weight in my chest. And now, glancing at Adrian, I saw that his calm was no longer aimless. His eyes were measuring, calculating, as if every condescending remark was only adding fuel to a plan he had been quietly setting in motion for a long time. The meeting ended with the scrape of chairs and Nathan's promise to update details. But as we stepped out into the driveway, Adrian suddenly stopped beside his old Toyota, his hand brushing over a scratch on the door, as though in thought. He turned to me, his voice low but resolute. "Do you trust me?" The question made me pause, my brows knitting, because I knew whenever Adrian said that, it meant he had decided on something important. I nodded without asking, though my heart beat faster. Adrian pulled his phone from his pocket, stepped aside, and dialed a number, his tone clipped and decisive, each sentence like an order being relayed. "Have it ready. Friday afternoon. Same location as before." I didn't know who he was calling, but the way he looked back toward the house with a calm, almost cold expression told me that nothing was going to stay the same. When he pocketed his phone, the corner of his mouth lifted ever so slightly, and I knew Adrian was ready to change his place on this family chessboard. 3 days later, we were invited back to my parents' house to finalize the task list for the wedding. The same polished living room, the same Nathan at the head of the table with his stack of documents and open laptop, as if presiding over a board meeting. As soon as we sat down, Nathan resumed his familiar condescending tone, this time with a faint smirk. "I've thought it through. I think Adrian and Victoria should just handle the logistics, small things that fit your abilities." I saw my mother sitting to his right, lips pressed into a smile as she nodded in agreement, then unexpectedly adding a remark that sounded like a joke but carried a sting. "Just make sure you save enough gas for the Toyota. Wouldn't want you calling a taxi for the guests on the wedding day." Both Nathan and my mother chuckled softly, while my father sat as always in silence, his eyes avoiding mine. I felt a heat crawl up my spine, but before I could speak, Adrian looked up, his gaze locking on Nathan as he asked in an even but loaded tone, "Is that what you think?" The room froze for a beat. Nathan hesitated, perhaps unused to Adrian responding directly, but Adrian said nothing more, only returned to his coffee, stirring slowly enough that I could hear the spoon tapping porcelain. I knew something was coming, and perhaps sooner than I had imagined. Just as Nathan began speaking again about the importance of everyone knowing their limits, a strange sound rose in the distance, at first only a faint hum, then quickly growing more urgent and powerful, making the window panes tremble. Everyone in the room stopped talking, eyes turning toward the window. From the sky, a sleek black helicopter was descending, its rotor blades churning the air into sweeping gusts that sent dry leaves scattering across the front lawn. I saw my mother frown and hurry to the doorway, both hands pressed to hold down her freshly styled hair, while Nathan squinted, shielding his forehead, trying to see clearly into the cockpit. When the helicopter landed right in the middle of the grass, the roar of the engine drowned out every other sound, freezing the entire scene in a surreal moment. Adrian stayed seated for a few seconds longer, calmly finishing the last sip of his coffee, then stood and set the cup down with an oddly gentle motion before turning to say, "Let's go outside. There's somewhere we all need to be." His voice was not loud, yet it echoed through the still air like a signal that the chess game he had been quietly preparing was about to reach its decisive move. My mother froze in the doorway, her eyes flicking rapidly between the helicopter and Adrian, as if unsure whether this was real or just some rented spectacle meant to draw attention. Nathan folded his arms across his chest, the corner of his mouth curling upward, ready to release a mocking comment, until he fell silent upon seeing the pilot step out, crisp in a formal uniform, and open the passenger door. Adrian walked toward them with steady composure, then turned his head back, speaking loud enough for all to hear. "We're going to the real wedding venue." The words made Isabella snap her head up, her eyes a mix of confusion and curiosity, while Julian blinked several times, as if trying to guess Adrian's intentions. My mother asked softly, her voice edged with a hint of alarm, How far is it?" Adrian only smiled and gestured in invitation. "Not far. But I think it's better if you see it with your own eyes." Without waiting for further explanation, he gently guided me forward. The rotor wash tossed my hair and dress in wild currents, making it feel as though the whole world was being pushed back behind us. I glanced over my shoulder to see Nathan still standing there, until a pull of irresistible curiosity seemed to draw him forward toward the helicopter. One by one, they stepped inside, faces still full of unanswered questions, but I knew, in just a few minutes, they would not hold the same arrogant certainty as before. The rotor slowed as the helicopter descended onto a landing pad surrounded by lush green trees, with a still, golden-lit lake shimmering in the distance. When the door opened, a cool breeze laced with the scent of water and wildflowers drifted in, replacing the tense atmosphere from earlier with something almost serene. Before them stood a luxurious lakeside event venue, a stone walkway scattered with fresh blooms, neat rows of pristine white chairs, and at the far end, a silk-draped arch adorned with a grand floral wreath, everything prepared to perfection, as if the wedding could take place tomorrow. Isabella froze, a hand rising to cover her mouth, while Julian instinctively reached for her hand. Adrian stepped ahead, turned to face the family, and spoke clearly. "This is where Isabella and Julian's wedding will actually take place, and all expenses have been paid." My mother's eyes widened, darting between Adrian and me as if unwilling to believe her ears. Nathan moved forward slowly, scanning the grounds until his gaze caught on the nameplate bearing the logo of a renowned event company. I could see the astonishment mixed with unease in his eyes as he realized everything before him far exceeded anything he had envisioned, and bore none of his fingerprints. While the air was still thick with awe, Isabella suddenly turned to everyone, her voice trembling yet brimming with pride. And one more thing. Adrian and Victoria have given us a 3-week honeymoon in Dubai. Everything already booked. Julian shook Adrian's hand, his eyes bright with gratitude. I saw my mother place a hand over her chest as if to steady her racing heart, while Nathan stood motionless, his expression unreadable. Adrian stepped toward him, his voice dropping but still carrying to every ear. By the way, I heard you're about to sign with a new investor for your coastal real estate project. Nathan's brows rose, his gaze sharpening. Adrian continued, slow and deliberate, as though weighing each word. I just completed the sale of my finance company for $105 million. In the process, my legal team discovered that the partner you're about to work with is entangled in a money laundering and fraud scandal. If you don't vet them carefully, you won't just lose your capital, you could face a criminal investigation. The color drained from Nathan's face instantly. He dropped his eyes to his phone, fingers tapping frantically to message his lawyer. Minutes later, his phone buzzed. As he read the reply, his complexion grew even paler. His lawyer confirmed everything Adrian had said. I saw his hand tighten slightly, a rare sign of genuine worry. In that moment, I knew Nathan had realized that if he didn't listen today, his company could be wiped out, and everything he had flaunted all these years could collapse with the signing of a single contract. The helicopter brought us back to my parents' home as the day leaned toward evening, the sunlight softer but the air inside the car still holding the weight of silence. My mother stepped into the living room first, her earlier cheer now gone, her gaze avoiding mine and Adrian's. Nathan followed slowly, still clutching his phone, glancing at the screen now and then as if rereading his lawyer's message to be sure he hadn't misheard. My father settled onto the sofa, fingers interlaced, letting out a long breath before speaking. Perhaps we've been wrong. His words were like a crack opening in the wall of pride that had stood for years. My mother lifted her head, her eyes uncertain, and said quietly, I shouldn't have compared Adrian to others. I've valued appearances too much. Nathan kept silent for a long time before stepping toward Adrian. I have acted like an arrogant fool. If you hadn't spoken today, I might have lost everything. Isabella, sitting beside me, squeezed my shoulder gently. I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner. I thought, maybe you didn't want the fuss. In that room, for the first time in years, we spoke without barbed undertones or judging glances, and I realized, sometimes no grand declaration is needed. Just the lightest touch can be enough to change how people see each other. After the apologies, the room fell into a brief silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. My father suddenly stood, walked to the wooden cabinet, and took out an old photo box, its edges yellowed with age. He set it on the table and opened it, revealing childhood photos of the three of us, me in a floral dress my mother had sewn, Nathan clutching a basketball, Isabella grinning with braided pigtails. My father pointed to one picture of me at about 10, standing in the yard with an old bicycle. You once rode it 10 kilometers to the market to buy things for your mother, then rode back. I never said it, but I've always remembered. My mother sat still, then, quietly, picked up another photo, me and Adrian on our simple wedding day 4 years ago, her hands trembling slightly. I've underestimated the value of this simplicity. Nathan quietly poured Adrian a glass of wine, saying nothing, but placing it in front of him like an acknowledgement in action. Isabella leaned toward me, smiling more sincerely than I had ever seen. On our honeymoon in Dubai, I'll take so many photos and send them to you first. I want you to be the first to see them. Light laughter filled the space, warm and unforced, like a thin layer of ice melting. I looked around the table and realized this was one of the rare times I was not in the role of the one being judged, but as an equal part of the family, and that, to me, was worth more than any gift. That evening, after everyone had left, Adrian and I sat together on the porch, the warm yellow light casting long streaks across the wooden table. From afar came the sound of crickets blending with the wind through the trees, a rare calm compared to the noisy days before. Adrian placed his hand on the table, gently intertwining his fingers with mine. "I don't need them to like me, only to respect you." I stayed silent for a moment, feeling the warmth of his hand, then smiled. "I think today was enough to change a lot." Looking into his eyes, I knew that everything, from the Toyota parked between two luxury cars, to the mocking words, to the moment the helicopter landed, was never about showing off, but about resetting our place in the family. On the table's corner still lay the wedding photo my mother had picked up that afternoon, its worn wooden frame now a reminder that true happiness needs no grandeur, only two people looking in the same direction. I rested my head on Adrian's shoulder, feeling the lightness of closing an old chapter, and in that moment I realized, respect doesn't always come from waiting for others to grant it, but from having the courage to claim it for ourselves. 2 weeks later, we received an invitation to dinner at my parents' house, something I used to accept with caution. But this time, the difference was clear from the moment we arrived. Adrian's Toyota had been given a spot right next to the front door, a place once reserved for Nathan's car. In the kitchen, my mother was bustling over a pan of lasagna, my favorite, and smiled warmly as soon as she saw us. I wanted to cook it myself today, not order from a restaurant. Nathan was there too, but instead of his usual immaculate suit, he wore a simple shirt, carrying a tray of glasses to the table. When everyone sat down, my father raised a toast. "Let's drink not only for Isabella's wedding, but for this family, for learning to listen to each other." The atmosphere at the table felt entirely different. No comparisons, no appraising glances, just genuine questions about our work and lives. When we left, Nathan shook Adrian's hand firmly, holding it longer than usual, as if to seal the newly established respect. On the drive home, Adrian glanced at me, the corner of his mouth curling slightly. "Looks like the chessboard really has changed." A few days later, while rearranging the bookshelf in the living room, a small envelope slipped from the family album. Inside was a handwritten card from my mother, the familiar script slightly shaky. "Daughter, it has taken me many years to understand that a person's worth is not in what they display, but in how they live and love. Thank you, you and Adrian, for teaching me this." I sat still, the words feeling like a full stop that closed every comparison, every prejudice from before. Adrian walked in, and I handed him the card. He read it, smiled, and placed it in the wedding photo frame on the table, right beside the moment we had chosen a modest ceremony over a lavish one. Outside, Adrian's Toyota still sat quietly in the driveway, humble as ever, but to me it was no longer a symbol of comparison. It was proof that we had endured it all, kept living our way, and claimed respect without sacrificing who we were. I knew that from now on, each time I returned home, I would walk in not as someone under judgment, but with the calm of someone who knows her true worth. And that was the greatest victory. My story with Adrian is not just about a family meeting or a helicopter, it is about daring to stand when you are belittled and resetting your place with truth and real value. Respect does not come from what others give you, but from the moment you are brave enough to claim it yourself. If you have ever been misjudged or underestimated, remember this: you don't need noise to prove yourself, but you do need clarity to be respected. What about you? Share your story or feelings below. And don't forget to like and subscribe so I can continue bringing you real stories from real lives.